And we're live.
All right, episode 3 of the Dialectic podcast.
Yeah, back at it.
Today we're going to do philosophy of religion.
Yeah, starting off easy.
Yep, start off with a real easy topic. What is God? Does God exist? Yeah, those are the main questions of philosophy of religion. It's not really like theology is the study of, what's inside of religious texts, but philosophy of religion is more trying to prove the existence of God, or yeah, that's basically most of it. Either prove or disprove the existence of God in the typical Western sense. So, like the monotheistic God that's, omnibenevolent and stuff, that, is all seeing, all powerful, all that jazz.
Mm-hmm.
The typical view of God is what a lot of philosophers were attempting to prove through various arguments. So, and then, other people came along and tried to disprove it. So, yeah, that's pretty much what we're going to cover today.
So who? You said you wanted to talk about Spinoza.
Oh yeah, I wanted to talk about quite a few philosophers. Um, yeah, I mean, I guess to start with, Anselm's like probably one of the most famous people for having a proof of the existence of God. And his argument was like, God's the best thing imaginable, and because it's a perfect thing and you can imagine it or whatever, like it should exist, and then something even better than you can imagine should also exist, therefore God exists, and it's better than anything you can imagine. I think that's more or less the argument.
So just doing like the rational thing up the chain of better and better states of being.
Yeah, and eventually it's like, well, God must be the best thing of all then, like he's better than all things.
That's an interesting way to look at it. In my experience, that is definitely true.
Yeah, I mean, well, that's certainly Anselm's argument, but there's lots of people who have definitely destroyed that argument. Mostly, you run into the problem of the existence of evil, like
Well, right,
right out the gate. That's a huge problem.
and the assumption that somehow God or the unity and the divinity of everything is only the upward trend, and not also it doesn't encompass the evil in the world. I think
Yeah.
a lot of these kind of theology kind of questions struggle with evil. It's a hard thing to understand.
Yeah, plus it just begs the question. It's like, well, okay, then I can imagine a perfectly benevolent flying spaghetti monster that is also
Yeah.
all-seeing and all-knowing
Which
and all-loving.
feels gross and wrong and
Yeah,
not really
exactly.
true.
I mean, you could use this as a justification for, well, it's a circular argument, basically. Like, yeah, I mean, it doesn't check out. Sorry, Anselm.
Well, no, I think it's beautiful in the sense that you should shoot for the stars and you should try to improve yourself, and it is possible. The proposition that it is possible to get better and it is possible to approach divinity in some real tangible way, but it's not the whole story. It's only part of the story.
Yeah, just his argument's a little weird, where, if God exists in the mind, then a better version of it exists in reality.
Mm. Well, I do think there's something there because, again, there's something to do with agency and consciousness, and certainly with our experience. And then you could definitely argue that that would be the case if the universe is kind of sentient in its own way. Then it would make sense, perhaps, that it had some kind of volition or goals or even a personality. Maybe there's different universes with different God personalities. Who the hell knows?
Yeah, and this is where the whole, Anselm trying to justify like a monotheistic God or like, an omnibenevolent, like Christian type God. I mean,
Well, that's
it's hard to
interesting.
justify because it falls apart as soon as you're like, well, I can imagine a Hindu God that also
Yeah.
does this. I can imagine, Buddha. I can imagine all kinds of other religious figures that.
Well, clearly we want to anthropomorphize it in that sense. But I do think on a deep, perhaps physical, real reality sense, the universe is somehow conscious. I mean, we are conscious and we're part of the universe. And if there is a God, so to speak, I just don't. This is honestly new to me to think about God in this way. I just think it's fascinating because it would speak to why so many people personify God in that way. you know?
Yeah, I mean, all these philosophers were like legitimately trying to use like scientific reasoning to like and logic to
Which
try
is
and justify existences
honestly,
for God.
that's kind of a fool's errand, I would argue, because
Well, I mean,
it's
they thought faith was like insufficient, so you needed, like some kind of like tangible thing to point out and be like, well, this is the reason God exists. Like, here, I
yeah,
can prove it to you. Here.
like we talked about, like it's true in a different way. It's true in, I would argue, in more of a kind of metaphorical, allegorical sense, but it's also true in a deeply kind of evolutionary way that science has no clue about.
Yeah. And Kant's response to like Anselm's argument is like what he's talking about is like a predicate basically, and he's saying a predicate is an existence. So he's
Mm.
yeah. So I mean, you can predicate anything, but that doesn't mean it exists. Like you
Well, in
can you
a
can
sense, it
predicate
does.
you can predicate an omnibenevolent God, but that doesn't mean it exists. You can predicate a flying spaghetti monster. That
Oh, I
doesn't
see
mean
what
it
you're saying.
exists.
Well, right, but would think that a lot of theologists and spiritual philosophical thinkers aren't just pulling it out of thin air. This is deeply rooted in hundreds of hours and years of study and introspection.
Well, yeah, definitely. Anselm was like super crazy devout.
Yeah, I mean, this is what I'm saying. It's like, where have I learned the most about God? It would be in the non-propositional, scientific, rigorous sense.
Well, I know
It's when I'm sitting quietly in
well. This is what
meditation,
this is
or
why mostly theology and stuff they're trying to focus on like the actual religious text as opposed to like sitting there trying to talk about proofs for the existence of God
yeah,
because then it calls God into question and then they don't want that. So philosophy of religion just tries to look at it from a slightly
yeah. I think it's
different
both.
angle.
You need both. You need that theology, and you need the ritual. You need to talk about it, and you need to do it.
Yeah,
Because in Buddhism, I'm going to talk a lot about Buddhism because that's my quote unquote religion, even though it's not really a religion. But um, they talk about it as the three jewels: the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. And it's like you need the study, and then you also need the practice, and then you need a community as well. So the community can fact check you.
yeah.
you know. So in a sense, understanding God can't only be understood propositionally and scientifically. I would argue it also has to be understood perspectively and embodied by doing. That's why there's rituals. That's literally the point of rituals, is to understand in a different way. And everything is a ritual. Everything is religious. What we're doing right now is a ritual. We're doing a dialogical ritual, hopefully to achieve pseudo spiritual states.
I don't know. I'm actually trying to disprove the existence of
I
God.
know.
So no, I'm
That's
trying. I'm being totally
this is
antithetical to
the
religion right now. So that's fine. But we're doing a Hegelian synthesis
yeah.
where you have a thesis that God exists. I'll have a thesis, the antithesis of
Well,
that, which is
no,
that
no, no, no,
God
no, no,
does
no.
not exist. At least the fucking monotheistic fucking version of God that they created in Christianity. I don't believe that
No,
exists
yeah,
at
yeah.
all.
Well, I think
The
it's
all-seeing, all-knowing, all-judging God. I don't think that exists at all. I think that's a crazy, crazy
well, it
notion.
could. You have to have the
Well,
epistemic.
sure, anything could exist. I mean,
No, 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 but it's not to say that everything goes. It's just to be a little more open-minded about it. If a good portion of the world believes in that, there's probably, where there's smoke, there's fire generally, right? I mean, this is a phenomenon that it has. I think of it evolutionary. Like I talked about in the beginning, you had many gods, and we've narrowed it down to one. In a sense, that's just like kind of useful and practical. And then in a sense, I think on an idea level, the idea is fought out on an evolutionary scale as well. So it kind of like culls it down to like one or two ideas, and that's kind of like the one or two God thing. Also, we mega anthropomorphize these prophets and shit, and we love to think that we're special. Um, and then, of course, I think it's useful to think about the future as a judgmental father, for instance, and it's useful to personify the earth as a mother. Like these are all just like psychological adaptations. But no, I don't. My intuition tells me that there's not a big bearded guy in the sky, but I think it's very important to have epistemic humility and know that there could be. And if you do the homework on consciousness, you can actually arrive at some proofs that make it seem like there's a creator.
Oh, I've got all the proofs written down for the
Yeah.
existence of God, but I'm
See,
I'm gonna say they're very easily dismissed. They're circular arguments, a lot of them, and like
totally.
they're that like every proof for the existence of God they've come out with, it falls apart at basically any kind of logical scrutiny, and that is, I mean,
Yeah.
somebody come up with a better one, and maybe I'll become religious. But like until I see a proof for the existence of God that actually can full
Yeah.
out
So,
prove it, then I'll keep my mind open. That's a way better idea.
yeah, I think it's
I mean, I like Spinoza's version of God, but we'll get to that a little
yeah.
bit
Okay. So
later.
continue. I keep derailing you.
Yeah. All right. So, and I guess the other, we'll get into Thomas Aquinas, who also came up with like the cosmological argument for the existence of God. And again, he was, trying to just prove God existed in a quasi-scientific, using logical type way.
Sure.
So, he had he had five different arguments. So his first one was motion. So he said that because objects are in motion, something had to set those objects in motion.
Yeah,
So that
the
thing is
prime
God.
mover.
Yeah,
Yeah.
prime mover. Yeah, the primary mover argument. So that's the first one. Causation's the second one. He's saying that something has to cause something else. So eventually you have to get to a primary causer of all things. So
Sure.
it's similar to the primary mover, but with causality instead. And then you have contingency, saying that everything's contingent on something else. So
Which
except for God. So once you get down to the only thing that's not contingent on anything,
Well,
then it
that
would be his. That would be God.
was that unity duality thing I was talking about earlier. If you have the unity, the only thing you're lacking is distinction. The second you bring in just distinction, you break the unity into parts.
Well, and then he said degrees also was proof for the existence of God.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was saying because things come in different degrees and stuff, eventually there has to be something that doesn't come in degrees, I guess, and that's God. So, yeah. Yeah, those are his four main ones. And then the last one is the teleological argument for the existence of God. And that one is that there's, God has purpose. They use the thing like if you found a watch on the ground, if you were wandering in the woods or whatever, then you would look at that and you'd say, "Wow, this was intricately designed by someone, so there must be a watchmaker." Exactly. So he's saying like God is the ultimate watchmaker. Yeah. Because so that gets into like intelligent design. That's actually where intelligent design stems from. Is like the teleological argument for the existence of God. So yeah.
If you go looking, you really get the sense that there's design to the whole thing. And again, I talked about the intent and the goal direction of the individual cell, and it appears biologically in deep sense that that's true all the way up.
Yeah, these arguments stack up a lot better than Anselm's for sure, because these are like some pretty difficult questions to answer. I mean, we have the Big Bang, which basically like explains the primary mover and primary causer argument.
Honestly, I don't know.
And contingency and degrees, actually, like to a certain extent, but it still doesn't explain why there's rules to the universe. I mean, there's, yeah, Aquinas was onto something.
Apparently, very finely tuned rules as well.
Yeah, and they are fairly, these are things that still philosophy and science can't really explain to a certain extent. Plus, the James Webb Telescope just basically calls into question even the Big Bang. So it's like, the way I always looked at this is that maybe time as we view it is kind of wrong. Maybe because there is infinite regression, there doesn't have to be a primary mover. But for us to picture time as infinite is really hard for our brains to grasp, because we want there to be a beginning and an end to everything, because there's a beginning and an end to our lives. So we think that the universe is the same way, but maybe it's not. Maybe it's just existed forever, and that's just the way it is.
Right.
Like, yeah, these are difficult questions.
I mean, part of me wants to say it's not even worth thinking about the primary mover, but I do think it is, because it's a good exercise to kind of go down the rabbit hole and see how far your assumption can take you. And I think it does arrive at the possibility, at least, of God, and of that God having consciousness, direction, and volition. If we do, heck, if even cells do, amoebas, everything else, there's no reason to think that other large-scale structures wouldn't have some sort of consciousness as well.
Yeah, I mean,
the universe consciousnesses on the regular, apparently. Or maybe we're rare. I tend to think we're not rare, and the universe is teeming with consciousness. And um, I think it's good to be humble because it's possible that people discovered things that we don't know. And this is what they're on about, and maybe God is real. I think the practice of epistemic humility is the key here. It's not the brass tacks of whether it's actually a guy in the sky or not. That's not interesting to me at all. It's this process of trying to understand ourselves and trying to understand the universe. And the cool thing is I've experienced things. I've experienced oneness. I've experienced other beings. I've experienced pseudo kind of talking in tongues, speaking in tongues kind of states, and spontaneous inspiration. So it's very clear and obvious why people believe in God. There's definitely something there that people connect to that's very hard to define, and it answers a lot of the biggest questions. So it makes sense to ask. It's interesting to me that a lot of these philosophers are even interested in that in the first place.
Well, again, faith isn't sufficient. Like to
Yeah,
have a
yeah.
logical argument, faith is not sufficient. It just is not. Like I don't think it's sufficient at all. Like when I
Well, see,
hear
interestingly,
people say, "Oh, you just gotta have faith," that's a
no,
cop out.
this is the thing. And so, in order to experience these things, I would argue you have to experience them first person, and in order to do that, you have to do these practices. And in order to do the practices, you got to have faith that the thing is going to even work at all. If meditation will blow your mind, but you don't believe that it will, then you'll never do it.
Well, meditation's different because it's backed by science, and that's non-religious and really a whole different thing. I mean,
Right.
I mean, it's a Buddhist practice, but
I
that's
know
completely
it's weird
separate
for me
from.
to talk about it as a religion. 'Cause
Sure, it's a religious practice, but it's also scientifically backed and becoming super popular. So it's like, no, that just is scientifically backed to make you concentrate better, period. Like,
yeah, it's
it
not
does,
just that, but
period.
yeah.
Like, that's what the science has shown. So
I know. Again, this is taking the beautiful and almost perverting it by trying to put it.
no,
under-
it's proving that it exists. So instead of
Yeah, but
having to
that's
have
not-
faith, you can
Greg-
scientifically back it and be like, oh, well, this is definitely going to work because here's a shitload of science that proves that it exists. Like,
But
it proves that
takes-
meditation is useful for you. So here's the science. Boom.
It takes the communion with God and it dumbs it down to the level of reducing anxiety. I mean, it's like a typical American thing to be like, how can I use this to make me perform better? When in reality, you're communing with the deep realities of the
I
universe.
mean, I don't see any problem with wanting to perform
No.
better ever.
At the core of it, I don't have a problem with that. I just think it's important to emphasize that that's not the
Well,
sole
for people who are
purpose.
non-religious like me, though, who still want to get something out of meditation in a
Yeah.
completely non-spiritual sense, then yeah, utilitarian, straight up.
And
like,
honestly,
I'll use it for utility. Like,
If that'll get you in the door, then I'll take it.
yeah.
But the God question in the Buddhist context is really interesting because they don't talk about it at all. There's no God. It's strictly on Earth. It's just human stuff.
Yeah,
the
that's
Buddha-
because Buddhism is deeply humanistic as opposed to
Yeah.
like being some dogmatic
I mean,
controlling
I
religion.
think some sects probably talk about it, and some people are more concerned about it than others. But it's a non-issue. It's very much about liberation. The interesting thing is liberation, nirvana, or enlightenment could be considered, at least in my experience, as communing with God. But they don't even like put it in that framework, really, you know.
Yeah.
And this focus on the creator, I do see it as a deeply psychological Western thing that we do. We love having this strict father who disciplines us and punishes us. It's just our own like cultural psychology.
I don't.
No, you know what I mean. Like I'm doing a gross comparison between East versus West. I just always found that so interesting. But anyways, continue.
All right. So yeah, the arguments against actually the teleological argument, and well, at least against the teleological argument, which is like intelligent design, is that The problem of evil, that the world's not a perfect place. You know,
Mm.
if you had a truly intelligent designer of the world and they would make the world like actually perfect, there'd be no poverty, there'd be no crime, there'd be no people living on the streets, it'd be, you know, a
Yeah, but
perfect utopia all the time. Like,
what we just talked about. In order to have the good, you have to have the bad. I mean, in a deep,
yeah, I mean, that's like the Hegelian dialectical, you
and
know,
the spiritual,
opposition type
like
version where it's like you have to have both of them, the yin and the yang type thing, where it's like
that is where
they
Buddhism
have to
gets.
both exist.
That is where Buddhism gets cosmological in that sense. Is this deep, deep acceptance of the duality in things? Like clearly, it has to be that way. You
So
know.
that would be the argument even against like a perfect world, and that would somewhat
Yes.
solve the problem of evil because you know you have to have evil to have good, at least according to like Hegelian dialectic, like they're self-emergent and
Yeah.
self-contained. So it's like you have to have one to have the other.
Yeah, because I love the analogy of God being omnipresent, omni whatever, just covering everything, is all, nothing exists apart from Him. There's just this unified field of light. What does it lack? It lacks separation and definition. There's nothing there. The second you introduce definition, you introduce a gap, you introduce a void. Philosophers talk about this gap, and that leaves room for evil. And it has to be that way. If everything's warm and sunny all the time, then you will never experience it as such because you don't know what cold feels like.
Yeah.
I mean, it's on one sense it's deeply simple and obvious duality in all things, but on another level it's pretty deep, and you have to kind of exist in this place where you're comfortable with the fact that evil exists. And I would argue that the key is seeing the evil in yourself rather than in other people. Um, Once you notice it in yourself, then you can tend to see it in other people as well. And it's in it. The Buddhists acknowledge it; they don't push it away. I mean, you don't want to you don't want to foster the bad thoughts and the evil thoughts, but it's very much like an acceptance of it. And I would say the Christians and a lot of the Abrahamic religions try to deal with evil in a very kind of disciplinary, controlling way, which is often, you know, maladaptive and not very productive.
Yeah, I think both Darwin and Hegel would say that just evil is emergent out of history. Like it's just an evolutionary process that just
Well,
happened.
first you
Like
gotta
it,
define.
yeah.
First you gotta define what evil is, and that's clearly a problem because.
Oh yeah, that takes a minute.
But I guess what we assume by that is all the bad, quote unquote. I mean, this is really difficult.
All the suffering in the world. I mean, that's a pretty fundamental like
But
definition of
but
evil, I
when
guess.
suffering causes positive evolution, you know what I mean? It's very hard to distinguish what is good and bad here.
Yeah, it's true because I suffer when I work out, but I love it.
Right.
That's the good kind of suffering. So yeah,
Or or all the millions,
there is good suffering.
all the billions of creatures that have died to evolve to get to where we are. You know, like, was that suffering bad? Um, you know, so I think
Yeah,
we're proving the point here. The point is to accept good and evil as both necessary. Pause. And we're back.
so yeah, I mean, evolutionary and historical processes just created the world kind of sort of randomly. I think Darwin and Hegel would say, or you know, randomly but adaptively.
Random,
But
random is a dangerous word.
well, I
to
should say
apply.
adaptively. So
Right.
it's just, you know, like creatures just kept adapting to their environment until eventually it springs out human consciousness.
Mm.
And then it's like as soon as human consciousness exists, then suffering starts existing. It's
Yeah,
like,
that's an interesting question. We were talking about consciousness earlier, and I'm not convinced that my dog isn't conscious. I don't think that's really possible to know because, A, like that interface of like, what do? You put like electrodes, you know, it's kind of hard to understand how to experiment. But then B, it's the hard problem of consciousness. We literally don't know how it arises. So how can we say that it doesn't exist in something else, you know? And clearly they experience emotions and stuff. So does Sadie, my dog, suffer? I think so.
oh yeah, if you heard it, it suffers.
Then it's
Obviously,
conscious.
yeah. I mean, yeah, I would definitely say that it's
So it's not,
conscious then.
suffering isn't just a human. This is the interesting thing about it. It's like we love to separate ourselves, but it turns out suffering is just a part of everything. But again,
See,
it's
this is Leibniz's version of God. He says that like, everything's this giant mechanical, like the whole universe is a giant clock. Like every single tiny thing down to the tiniest atom is all one intricate clock. And creatures like Sadie has a consciousness. Like each individual thing mechanically that's
yeah,
functioning in the universe has a consciousness, and that's like he also said that's God. He was friends with Spinoza actually. Like Leibniz and Spinoza were
really.
friends. Yeah, yeah, which is I think where Leibniz got some of his well, definitely got some of his ideas from. But Spinoza was the ultimate G when it came to his version of God. I actually do believe in Spinoza's version of God. Actually,
Someone said that everybody after Spinoza is just follow Spinoza
yeah,
unconsciously.
that's yeah. But Spinoza's version of God is that there was just one fundamental underlying substance that was everything, and that
Well,
was
think
that was
about how
God.
common everybody says that. They're
Yeah,
like, I'm not religious, but I'm spiritual, and it's this underlying energy.
yeah, and that's
It's
pantheism.
literally Spinoza.
Yeah, pantheism. I mean, but it's popular in other religions too, like
Mm,
Hinduism and Buddhism. I think both
totally.
believe in pantheism, and
It's a part of my metaphysics. I mean, in one sense, if you get down to physics, everything is just excitations and fields. You have the Higgs field, the electromagnetic field, on and on and on. So it's very clear in one sense that we actually are physically connected that way.
yeah, exactly. And there is only one universe in substance. I mean, separation almost is an illusion in that regard.
Hmm. But to me, the cool part about that is again realizing that Spinoza isn't some weird. I mean, he was a luminary, he was brilliant, but that very simple idea of looking at the world that way, it came out of him. These philosophers kind of put their finger on the pulse and they describe what we are all trying to say, but we can't really say. And
Yeah.
I think that's part. When was Spinoza? That's
Oh God,
15th, 14th century.
I don't know. I would need to pull up
I
a
mean, it's around the time
phone.
when our ideas around God are starting to
Wait,
mature,
here, I'll look this up really quick.
and that we're starting to get a more kind of rational, scientific view on the world. It's like we're starting to evolve our um, our comfort more with a more rational view on metaphysics. I guess I'll put
Yeah,
it that way.
Spinoza was like mid 1600s.
1600s.
Yeah, mid 1600s.
Yeah, I was way off. But no, I mean the
And
point.
influenced a ton of philosophers. I mean, he influenced Hegel. Like Einstein said that his version of God was Spinoza's God. Terence McKenna said his version of God was Spinoza's
Right.
God.
Like, think about how much that influences all of us. I mean, it just taking God away from this solitary figure and saying, no, 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 it's this aggregate of all the things.
Yeah, yeah, which is definitely how I'd like to view it.
Again, in a deep sense, energy is real, everything is connected.
Yeah,
And
there's
then,
fundamental mathematical laws of physics. Like just
yep,
that alone shows
wave
something's
equations.
intelligent, or there's some kind of
So the
something that's
intelligence,
controlling something.
I go back to the Hermetic thing as above, so below, and there's deep truth in that, it seems. I mean, there's also parity, there's difference. Um, but if we are conscious, if dogs are conscious, if fungi and trees are conscious in some way, then it's not. I want to be humble enough to go up the scale, like we talked about. We could be an experiment, we could be in the Matrix, we could be some alien's little fucking, side project.
Yeah,
Or
exactly.
seriously, like we don't know, man. How far does this go? How big does the scale get? It's really hard to.
Yeah, statistically, it's actually more probable that we're living in a simulation
Right,
reality than we
right.
are that God exists. Like, statistically, that's what's going on, people.
So therefore, I would argue then the existence of God is also highly plausible. I'll put it that not highly, it is plausible, and I think we should be aware of our preconceived notions and our biases against. People trigger, man. They're like, you say God, and they're like, bullshit. It's like, wait, hold on, man. I'm talking about like love and togetherness, and you don't even know what I'm talking about.
Well, I know. This is why, like, even trying to define what is God
Right.
becomes problematic because every
What do you
religion has
mean
a
by
different
God?
definition of it. Like,
Yeah.
some are, polytheistic, so some have multiple gods, some have lots and lots of gods. So,
Right. I
so
would argue that for me at least, it's not. If anybody cares, it's not. It's not a proposition. I can't be like, I've done the homework. and I've saw a bunch of videos, and and they've proven the existence of God. This is not how you're going to get at it.
Well, I mean, that's what I did. I basically went through and was like, all right, we'll go through history here. What do we got? Who's got an existence for the
Like YouTube can
proof for
teach
the
me
existence
everything.
of God? Let's go, let's go. And just, nope, these are all actually kind of falling up short. Although they inspire lots of good questions. That's the whole point of philosophy, anyways. It's just to question your own beliefs, question reality, bring up good questions, know how
Yes.
to ask questions.
Um, I would say God is a participation. It's not a thing to be known. It's a game to be played. I'll put it that way.
Well, I like Spinoza's version
You got
of
to act
God
it out.
because pantheism means that like we're all one part of the same underlying fundamental substance. So it's like you can derive a very easy system of morality based on that by just being like, oh, well, me and you are still part of the same substance. We're all connected. We're all the same. We're all one. Like
Hmm.
that kind of notion goes very far into building like a very straightforward ethical code, and that's kind of like where Hegel goes with it too, as far as being able to recognize the self-consciousness of another person to be able to achieve your own self-consciousness. That's like what it takes in order to be a self-conscious individual. So
Yeah, that's
so
a
it's like recognizing God in other people and in nature and in
yeah.
even like historical society. Like it's like looking for God in everything.
Yeah,
Like
well, when you notice the individual, and you notice that they're separate and at the same time the same as you, in a sense, you are, yeah, you're looking into God's eyes.
plus, like, the world is kind of this giant, crazy mechanical clock
Yep,
that's just like, action, reaction, like,
everything's weirdly connected
yeah, and
and
the
associated.
butterfly effect, yeah.
Yeah,
And
and I think it's good to be humble in the fact that like we might be able to affect things in a deeper way than we realize, and perhaps these spiritual people are like onto something with their practices and their insistence on certain things. And yeah, maybe some of the more fantastic stuff too. I like I say, I constantly am impressed with what arises out of metaphysical practice. It's never intuitive and rational. It's always surprising and magical.
yeah, I do think Aquinas's arguments are interesting. Like, do you think we will ever fundamentally answer the question of what is the starting point?
No,
Like I don't think
no,
we
it's a
will either. It's
process.
it's almost like fundamentally like point to consciousness, in your head or in your body. Like you just can't do it. Like yeah, the what emerges out of the aggregate is like way greater than the sum of its
It's
parts for this stuff.
combinatorially explosive, and it could be infinite,
Yeah.
right? I mean, if infinities exist, which they seem to do, then there's no way for us to ever fully
Yeah, and maybe the
understand it.
universe is infinitely recursive.
That
Like
to me makes it exciting, because then philosophy and science is never done. We can keep going. We're never gonna fully understand it all.
yeah. Yeah, it's very important to ask these metaphysical questions. So, I mean, this is kind of my problem with dogmatic religions is, you throw out all these metaphysical questions for just faith. No, just have faith. God created everything in 7 days. It's like, wow, that's
That to
just
me,
that's
it's
just a
like,
cop out to bigger questions in the world, which fundamentally need answering, in my opinion. So, or at least need to be like explored, discussed,
yes,
dissected.
it's like lazy religion. That's how I see that.
Yeah,
Because it's like,
it's a cop out.
if you actually, I would argue, a lot of these practices, if you actually embody it and do it, A, it's really hard, and B, you learn things in a more holistic kind of embodied way. Like you actually experience the philosophy rather than just spouting it. You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
like what we're doing, we're experiencing philosophy rather than just spouting it. And at least Buddhism, that's really a big. And I know a lot of other religions are the same way. It's just about the ritual and the culture and the people and
I mean, like
the ethics.
Bali is a very good example of like a religion that I love their religion. I fully
Right.
like embrace that one, but their religion's beautiful. I mean, their ceremonies are beautiful, their art's beautiful, their philosophy generally on life's pretty beautiful, which is to like, keep in balance nature, like your interaction with nature, your interaction with people, and then your interaction with God. So they like try to balance all three of those, and it shows in Bali. Like, yeah, and Yeah, it's just a really pretty religion.
Yeah, I'm with Sam Harris on this with the landscape of ideas. So there's good religions and there's bad religions. There's good ideas and there's bad ideas, and they're all battling it out in an evolutionary way, just like everything else.
Yeah, it seems like their religion, it just makes them very nice, open, inviting people.
And I would say those are the more adaptive religions.
Yeah, yeah, it definitely is more adaptive. It's been able to like, take in Westerners and stuff and
Mm,
be able to like, take them to temples and,
yeah,
embrace their religion and embrace their cultures and customs. And yeah,
yeah.
Bali's great for that.
And again, I hear myself the word religion, and it has this really constrictive, dogmatic, negative connotation. I want to repurpose, reframe the word, take the word back. Religio means togetherness. I really think this is the key point. It's the aggregate. It's getting comfortable with being close to other people, being close with yourself, with all the disparate parts. I don't know, in a way, that's what love is, right? It's this attention and this closeness.
Yeah,
And that if you experience that, you practice that whatever way you want, going to the movies, going to a concert, that is very clearly similar to a religious experience. I can't tell you the difference between a really good conscious or like a really good concert or a deep state of meditation. They're very, very similar. Or the youth rallies I used to go to, the Christian youth rally. You're all like rolling in Jesus's spirit. It's just like going to a concert, man. It's experiencing togetherness with other people. That is really the core aspect of it. It is not about the dogma and the guy in the sky. It's about the really humble, beautiful.
well, it depends on the religion.
Well, I'm saying
And
for me, this is
yeah.
this is all my theory on what religio means, and again, you got the parable of God and Satan walking down the road, and God's like, "Look, the truth," and Satan's like, "Here, give me it. I'll organize it for you." Like the second you try to take this beauty down and you try to put it into something tangible, you make it human, and humans are flawed.
Yeah, and I guess we will get into a little bit of theology. I mean, there's a lot of good moral and ethical things that a lot of religions can teach. I will never deny
Yeah, I
that
mean,
one.
like I said, we exist in that Judeo-Christian framework, like very subconsciously, I would argue, and or some people are. I'm fully conscious of the fact that
Well, just because we're from the West, I
yeah,
mean, grow up in Bali, I mean, and grow up in a different country, and you will have a Hindu framework, you will have a
yes,
Buddhist framework, you will have a
yeah.
Taoist framework, you will
And
have a totally different framework.
to
Like,
me, it's very fractal in nature. God is fractal, so it makes sense that there's different religions because they all kind of look at a different piece of the fractal. And if you look at a fractal, it's wildly different depending on which part you're looking at it when it's all rooted in the same very basic starting conditions.
yeah,
It's really beautiful, actually, how to, out of that unity, that oneness, you get all this crazy plethora of being.
well, all the major religions were trying to answer the same fundamental
Yeah,
questions, which is like the primary mover question. It's
right.
basically like all of Aquinas's, like, proofs for the existence of God. Those are the same things that every other religion is attempting to answer.
Sorry.
So, that's it. It's like, every religion has a story of a primary mover as their ultimate deity. Like every religion has the primary causer. Like
Why do you
they're
think
all
that
they're all
is? Do you
very
think
similar. Like all of them have an explanation for what happens before you die, after you die. All of them have an explanation for the creation of the universe. Like every single religion answers these questions, and it's because fundamentally they're unanswerable questions. At least a shitload of them are. Like some of these metaphysical questions, like what happens after you die, are like maybe unknowable. Like we may never ever figure that out. And
no?
like,
That's what it was. I mean, originally those types of
but that scares the shit out of us. So we want to cling to religion because then it has answers for those
well,
things.
no,
Like
it's
especially the really scary questions. Like, I,
in history that is where we went for those types of questions. I'm just realizing this as you were talking, and now we go to science for those types of questions.
yeah, at least we try to. But like science still can't explain what happens to consciousness after death, or
Exactly.
where it goes, or what
Exactly.
consciousness is, or
Right.
like science. Well, can
This
science
is
can science answer moral questions? Yes, I would say using logic. Using logic, you could probably get there with science alone.
I would
But still, it's kind of religion has at least given us a fundamental basis of morality across the world to deal with.
Right.
But that probably would have been emergent. At least Hegel would argue that that would have emerged anyways, like just through the interaction of consciousnesses in society, like forming societal norms and like coming to
No.
agreements
This is where I disagree. I don't think
but they did it
virtue.
across the world independently of each other. Every society formed that way independent of each other, and they came up with societal norms, rules that govern their society. They all agreed to basically social contracts. Like every single
With
society, irrelevant of religion, irrelevant of
yeah, but
views on anything, like they all came to the same conclusions on that one.
well, they didn't all come to those conclusions.
Well, I mean, they all came to the like that your consciousness exists and that we should treat each other
But
nicely
this is all
because if I treat you like shit, you can treat me like shit, and then we become enemies and threaten each other, and then it's total anarchy and chaos. So we need to set some ground rules so that we don't just wind up killing each other.
yeah, but
And
that's all within a religious ethical framework.
yeah, but it's every single religion came to it independently. So
Right, because it's emergent out of the structure
well,
of the
like I said,
universe.
it's just emergent out of like the desperate need for a social contract because
Right.
anarchy does not work. Like I know, I love Fight Club a lot, but anarchy does not work, people. Like, does not work.
So, again, this used to be the home, all the meaning making and the understanding used to be the home for, religion was the home for all of that. And now science is the home. But can you come up with a system of ethics on how to treat people and the deep vagrancies and strangeness of the universe embodied out of cultural and spiritual practice? Can you do a college thesis on that? I'm really not sure.
What? Yeah, definitely. There's been probably thousands of them written.
No, but can it? You're basically saying, can you?
Can you come up with a system of moral ethics without religion? Yeah,
Can
fuck
you
yeah, you
define?
can.
It's like saying, can you define God or something?
Well, I'm just saying, because, I mean, Peterson brings this up too. Jordan Peterson brings this up too. And a lot of other people bring up, like, oh, because religion's dead, that's why we're having such a meaning crisis. Like,
Yeah,
you
Nietzsche.
can't have a system of
So
moral,
Nietzsche said.
you can't have an ethical and moral system without religion. Like,
Well, partly true.
but I don't think so. I think, all it takes is like good old Hegelian recognition of the other consciousness as self-conscious. Like, as soon as you do that, you can easily logically come up with a moral system and an ethical system, like independent of religion. And this is obviously true because, like, this basically every religion came up with the same core ethical and moral principles, which was just to be nice to each other and recognizing that the other soul exists and that you're not just an NPC, like walking around, and that I'm not a god, like I don't control everything, like that basic recognition you can build a moral system off of.
Can't the sociopath or the psychopath acknowledge that someone else exists and not care and just kill them?
Oh, sociopaths, I think that's the problem, is I don't think they recognize that other people
No, they
exist. I
know-
think they are gods.
They know that other people exist, though.
Do they, though? I
Yeah,
mean,
they're not stupid.
Because if you're hurting someone, like, well,
They don't have empathy. That's a different thing.
yeah, I guess that's true.
This is where the ethics come
yeah,
in.
you could have. Yeah, I guess that's true.
You know,
I mean,
Greg,
Hegel would argue though that if you don't have any empathy, then you have no ability to self-actualize. Period. Like empathy is an absolute prerequisite for
This is why-
self-actualization.
This is what's so frustrating about all this, because all I'm trying to say is that some of these religious systems on a varying scale are clearly borne out for good reason. They explain a lot of this stuff and they put us in boxes so that we don't become these terrible killing.
Oh yeah, I agree.
Wanton
Absolutely.
machine. It's
Historically,
really
it was
good.
super necessary. It was absolutely necessary historically.
Well, no. This is where we diverge.
Or at least
because
social contracts.
the
were.
religious impulse does not go away. You are just going to apply it in a different way. And this is the problem. If it's not rooted in deep, careful, thought out, borne out, physical, psychological, mythological, philosophical. Back in the day, man, there was no separation between philosophy and religion. You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly.
This shit is ancient. Like, to have someone just
well, religion and philosophy are the same thing. I mean,
dismiss the Ten Commandments, to dismiss the Four Noble Truths, to dismiss the Bhagavad Gita as idiosyncratic, like
what? No, I'm not saying do that.
No, you know what I'm just like getting at, like this core criticism of religion that really bugs me. I feel like it's like totally. They're like, religion can't predict the motion of the atom, and it's like that's
yeah, you
not
missed the point.
It is literally. I mean, the interesting thing is it actually helps with your perception in ways, but like, no, it's not. It's a different thing. It's the other side of the coin almost. On one side you got science, and on the other side you have God and fractals and everything else. And it almost seems like it's counterproductive to do a philosophy of
See,
God.
Spinoza would argue against that, though. He says all the, scientific rules that exist in the universe, those were created by the underlying substance, which is God. So
Yeah.
it's like even those like are God just manifesting itself, or at least showing its logic to
Okay,
us,
here we
I
go.
guess.
The Zen koan, even the finger pointing at the moon is just the finger. It's that
Yeah.
idea. It's like we're just using like our apish little logic games that we have to define God. I mean, I really think it's a fool's errand. It's useful and
Well,
it's
no, it
interesting.
needs to be done because a lot of people, like, I don't know, like I
I
said,
think
critical
God
thinking is
needs.
important and you should
Yes,
question
yes,
everything. So, like,
yes. I mean,
like,
we're doing a
even,
philosophy
yes,
podcast,
I'm
so
questioning the existence of God. That is happening right now.
yeah. And our camera died again,
All right,
and
we
we're
good?
back.
All right. So, yeah. I mean, with the philosophy of religion, the first thing to always keep in mind is that nothing is sacred. Like that is the number one thing. Like no question is sacred. Like, and that should apply to all of life. No question should be sacred. You
What do
should be
you
able
mean
to
not?
ask any question.
My initial reaction to nothing is sacred is that's
No, no
pretty.
question is sacred.
And what do you mean by that?
By that I mean it used to be, if you question the existence of God back in the day, you'd be crucified.
Oh, I
So
see. Yeah, yeah.
so it took a lot of balls for a lot of these philosophers to actually like try to come up with proofs for the existence of God, and then the people that like tried to dismiss those, oof, yeah, you better believe some of them got crucified for it.
Hmm.
So
Yeah, the tyranny of ideas is always a problem. I think
yeah.
that's true with any idea. Clearly, not just religions. Although religions are perhaps prone to it because they exist in that meaning-making kind of rule-setting domain of humanity where you want answers, we got them.
Yeah, and who knows? Maybe I'll get crucified for this, for even calling into question like that God may not
No,
exist. But like, if I don't think anything's sacred. Like, at least not in that
well, I
regard. You should be able to
wonder.
question anything. That's all I'm saying.
I wonder if that's what happened with Socrates. I mean,
Oh yeah, no. Socrates asked too many questions, and he
yeah.
pissed everyone off, corrupted the youth of Athens, and then yeah.
And then Nietzsche took a hammer to God. Or, is it Nietzsche or Nietzsche?
I think either's fine.
The French say Nietzsche. Yeah, he took a hammer to God, and he was partly responsible for the destruction. And we all take it for granted that we're so smart, we understand how silly Christian. For a long time, that's what everybody thought, and nobody questioned it. And it's like now it's like this brave new world where we question it. My only argument is that don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, and be careful when you're messing with the fundamentals of ethics and morality. In my experience, it's not very easy. You know what's common without ethics and morality? Nihilism and depression. You know what's uncommon when you go down some kind of ethical, path? Those exact same things. There's correlation here. I'm not saying that it's the only way, although I'm interested to think or to see a purely atheistic system of ethics. I
Well,
think.
like I said, all you have to do is recognize that people aren't NPCs. That would be the number one premise, is that other people have consciousness. And then from there, you can build an entire ethical
Yeah, but
system.
so if
I mean, that's basically what Hegel did.
yeah, well, it's funny that you say that because it's like you want everybody to have an ethical system based on Hegel, who's like one of the most complex
Well, I know.
thinkers.
That's why we're trying to break him down. That's why we're trying to break down his shit. And
Yeah.
hopefully I'm getting it right, but I think I'm getting it right. I think that I, at least after reading so much Hegel and breaking everything down, I think that I at least have a pretty cursory understanding of what he was trying to get at. But basically, through the master servant dialectic and stuff, that whole thing is about recognizing that other consciousnesses exist so that you can be self-actualized. Like, the only way to achieve self-actualization is to recognize that people are not NPCs and that they exist, they have their own free will, their own independent consciousness, and once you do that, you can self-actualize. But it takes that process to achieve self-actualization.
Mm-hmm.
So once you do that, though, then you can come up with a system of morality and ethics. I mean, pretty easily based on that, which is just the golden rule. So be nice to others, do unto others the way you'd want to be treated unto you. That's pretty straight up.
I would argue that that's not a very straight ahead proposition.
What? Well,
The straight ahead
you
proposition.
could get there with a lot of premises, and I could write like a 600-page philosophy book that would eventually get there. But like, you could start out with, "Ow, I stubbed my toe," so that sucks. So maybe that other person, when they stub their toe, they feel the
Right.
same thing. So I shouldn't, kick them in the shin because that also hurt. And then you just build from
But
there.
the proposition that
I don't like getting my shit stolen, so I shouldn't steal other people's shit.
that is what I disagree with. I think the human and primitive nature would think, why not just kill and steal everything?
Well, exactly, and that is, I mean, Hegel would argue that is human nature until we recognize the soul in another person and have the ability. That's why with the master-servant dialectic, he's saying if two independent consciousnesses that thought they were both basically gods were wandering around in a material world full of inanimate objects and ran into each other, their first instinct would be to try to murder each other. And then whoever yielded basically would become the slave to the other person, and then they would have to go and work the field for a while, and they would achieve self-actualization through their work and through working through the land and seeing the progress of their work. They would achieve self-actualization. The master wouldn't. And it wasn't until the master freed the servant or, became less disconnected from the means of production or whatever, or just recognized that they're conscious, that they would break free of that and achieve self-actualization. I know that's
I see.
I know that's a long.
Now I know what you're getting at.
It's very complicated. Like Hegel's probably the most complicated writer I've ever read. But that's basically the premise of it. So, he's saying that once you recognize that other consciousness exists, then that's how you get self-actualization.
I don't think that to me is it's like.
And then you can build moral codes from there.
It's like step one, know that other people exist. Like step two, who knows? Step three, who knows? Step four, actualization. I just think that whole connection is rather fuzzy because just because I know someone else exists doesn't.
Well, he's basically saying that you can't prove your own existence until you can prove that other people also exist. I mean, that's actually what he's kind of getting at.
Well, yeah, that's the deep.
So he's saying it takes other recognition of consciousness in order to achieve self-actualization.
So that's something different. That's philosophy and metaphysics. It's not ethics.
Well, but he builds an ethical system based on that. So, because once, like I said, if you thought that just everyone else was just like inanimate objects, you would treat them all like shit.
Right.
Like, think about a video game like fucking Grand Theft Auto is a perfect example, right? Like, because you're basically a god in that game and there's no repercussions for anything, you run around and you kill everyone, shoot cops, do whatever you want. And that's a prime example of, like, until you maybe run into another human that's not an actual character, an actual self-consciousness, it's another player online or whatever, and then you have a totally different interaction with them. Like, and this is that's a good analogy to Hegel, because he's saying that unrestrained consciousness like that would be very destructive, or just very usury. It would just treat everything like an object. And he's
You're
like, as soon as you stop treating people like objects, then you can achieve self-actualization.
You're proving my point. You need to have a system of ethics, otherwise you get just chaos and bloodshed.
No, I'm saying that's the starting point. Is recognition of the soul in another human being, or self-conscious or consciousness in another human being. Just trust me, that is the fundamental starting point for a system of ethics.
Well, I'm trying to tease this out because I disagree, so I'm trying to prove why I disagree. All right, so I know that you exist. What does that give me? That only gives me duality. Initially, I would probably think, oh, we're separate, so I can just take from you. Now, where do I get this introduction to the idea that I shouldn't take from you? Nowhere. I would argue that the whole.
Well, no. Once you recognize. Well, see, this is why I said when those two consciousnesses first meet, they would try to steal from each other and shoot each other until they came to some kind of contract or terms or whatever, where they were like, well, maybe we should work together as opposed to trying to kill each other.
How are you getting there, though?
What do you mean?
From you, because you're saying you get from the realization of the other to a system of ethics. How are you getting there?
I mean, once you realize that other people exist, you realize you can hurt them. You can hurt them badly because
so why
you can
not
be hurt
them?
Because you can also be hurt.
Yeah, but you see what I'm saying? That just the cold hard fact that someone else exists.
See, this is why I'm saying you could have a totally selfish system of ethics, even just based on, well, I don't want this to happen to me, so I shouldn't do it to you. This sucks when it happens to me, so I shouldn't do it to other people.
No, but you're proving my point. The starting proposition is that there's two separate consciousnesses. It's not directly apparent and intuitive nor obvious that what I do to you will hurt me and vice versa. That to me is the point of Adam and Eve and the fall from grace, is the fact
No,
that,
it won't hurt you, but then I could potentially go and fucking hurt you.
yeah,
And
that's what
if
I'm
you hurt
saying.
me. So that's where we need social contracts, because and yeah, that's where you get social contracts and a system of morality and
Yeah,
ethics.
and
It's
all
just strictly based on we can both fuck each other up, so let's agree not to do
yeah, and
that.
all I'm saying is that that is in fact the good part of what religions are. Is they're simply a social contract structure.
Yeah, no, it's like it's yeah, it is it's like the fundamental underlying layer to get to social contracts is usually what religion was, more or less.
So that we all don't just rape and pillage each
Yeah,
other all the time.
exactly. And I
I mean,
mean,
that's part of it. I honestly think it's deeper than that. Again, metaphysics, alchemy, all this stuff was like connected back in the day. So I do think you're speaking to deep truths about the reality of the universe. It's just not necessarily things around matter and stuff. But again, because of matter and energy duality, then they are going to be connected, you know? But I think it's like the wrong tool for the job. It's like, do you want to understand the motion of the planets? Religion's not really the best place for that.
see,
Do
but
you want to
my
understand
problem with
how to
developing
live a good life?
moral codes off religion though is that people can misinterpret the text, and then you get these whack moral
Well, right.
systems that hurt a shitload of people, and those aren't good systems.
I
Like
would
those aren't good
argue,
moral or ethical systems if they're doing a shitload of damage and hurting a ton of people. Like
right.
they could still be a direct interpretation from the Bible and hurt a shitload of
It's
people with
the
those
it's
ideas. So
it's the interpretation. It's actually an essential part of it, I would say. Like, I think God, this is weird to say, but I think God would want you to, in the Bible they talk about like he who struggles with God. Like it's actually supposed to be a struggle. That's part of it. You're supposed to like disagree and fight with it. Again, it's like this weird kind of like interaction with it. Like in order to get anything out of the idea of God, you got to actually like interact with it and try it out, and then lo and behold, you get something out of it. It's really really weird. Um, and I would just wholesale say that I'm very skeptical of atheists coming up with a system of ethics on their own. Again, this is kind of like,
and me as an atheist, I'm skeptical of like religions coming up with a set of moral and ethical codes of their own,
so
because
clearly we're
look at
somewhere in the middle.
well, yeah, I mean, look at like some of these super restrictive religions, like
No,
in
I
Middle
don't agree
Eastern
with
countries where like according to their religion, it's okay to treat women as property.
dogmas are
Like,
passe,
you
man.
know,
Dogmas are passe. You really need to be. I think we really need to be comfortable with variety and multiplicity and different religions and holding things lightly. Dogma is clearly, this is interesting though, because dogma for some things is productive, but you just don't want to ossify. You always got to take it and,
I think being dogmatic is a terrible thing. People need to be
well,
way
say
more
you're trying to start a
open-minded.
Fortune 500 company, to have some rigidness within your system is a good idea. So dogma is not always a bad idea.
I think
It's just,
even a lot of Fortune 500 CEOs would
yeah.
say, no, that's wrong.
I
You
know.
don't want to be dogmatic. You want people to
Yeah.
like use their fucking brains
All
in your
right.
company
I
and be
know this
fucking
is
free thinkers, unless you just want to be a cog in a machine. I
this
mean,
is kind of
if you're the owner of
proving.
Walmart, you don't want them to think for themselves. If you're the owner of someone who's exploiting their labor directly, you don't want them thinking for themselves. But
Yeah.
if you're working at Tesla, you want them thinking for themselves. Like if you're doing an engineering firm, you want
Yeah.
them thinking for themselves. Like,
It's a both and kind of thing.
yeah.
They both have their purpose. You need both those kinds of
I,
people too.
yeah, I just dogmatic religions I have a serious problem with because I'm a critical thinker. People need to be more open-minded, in my opinion.
While you're closed-minded about the dogmatic religions.
No, but I've studied them all. So how is that
No,
closed-minded?
I'm just teasing you, Greg. See, the funny thing about this is we really don't agree. My metaphysics, this is going to sound weird, but it transcends and includes that. It really does. I'm comfortable with the variety of religions, and I'm comfortable with my deep religious experiences that I've had in a kind of non-religious framework, right? Like Buddhism is the most non-religious religion there is. But I've also gone to church, Christian church, and gotten deep meaning out of that as well. But I don't think it's scientific. I value Hegel and his view on it. I value all the philosophers' like kind of scientific view on something that isn't scientific. But I do think it transcends and includes that. And I guess that's just where I'll leave it. It is possible to experience God, and I don't know what the best way is, but
I mean, you can definitely experience Spinoza's version of God. I mean, you're experiencing it right now. Like,
right.
you're literally
That's it.
always experiencing
Well,
Spinoza's version of God,
that's the cool thing
which
about
is kind of cool. That's why I like Spinoza's version of God. It's not some omnibenevolent
yes.
dude in the sky with a beard. It's just everything. Like,
Well, if God is omnipresent, then how can it not be everything? It's kind of
it's everything, but it's not conscious of it. I
right.
mean, Hegel would say that, like, through human consciousness, that is God understanding itself. Like human consciousness is the only lens that the universe has for its own
So far,
self recognition, right? Like,
well, the dogs and stuff, but
unless
yeah,
there's aliens out there, which there probably are, that
yeah.
hopefully at least have achieved also self awareness and self consciousness.
Mm.
But yeah, he would say that, you know, human consciousness is God and the universe trying to understand itself. Like, human consciousness is God trying to understand itself.
I
Because
think
God doesn't have any other way to understand itself, according to Hegel.
I think that's deeply true, and I think we should call it.
Okay. Yeah, let's call it. That was a good one.
That was a good one.